على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Yesterday we looked briefly at some of the verses of Surah al-Hujarat, and today inshallah I would like to look at a few more verses and complete our brief glance at this very important chapter of the Quran. One of the messages that we get in Surah al-Hujarat is about the etiquette, the character, the ethics that Muslims should have in our life. And this is one that is rooted in humility and in veneration and honoring the role of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa in his lifetime, but also after his death, and to maintain a reverence and a humility with respect to his teachings and sayings that are narrated from the Prophet. Sometimes people, they have a skepticism and a cynicism, and they're very quick to say that this might not be authentic. When the adab that we are taught by Ahlul Bayt is, if you hear a hadith or a story or a message and it strikes you as maybe not being accurate, then don't be quick to reject it, but rather say that this is something that I don't understand, and I will reserve judgment and I will defer until I am able to gain knowledge from somebody who has a greater insight or a greater knowledge than I do. Maintain a certain kind of humility and don't be quick to reject or even be skeptical about those things that are attributed to the Prophet. Now, if it seems to you that it contradicts what you know to be the teachings of Islam, or there is a hadith and it seems to be contradictory to other ahadith, then don't latch onto it and say, well, it's in a hadith, therefore it's right, therefore I have to practice it. But also, don't reject it and defer that judgment to those with greater knowledge. The point that we get from this logic is that if you want to honor Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa you cannot do that without honoring the scholars and the tradition of scholarship that preserves the teachings of our Prophet. Because if I say that, well, I love the Prophet, I love Ahlul Bayt, but I'm not really sure about the fuqaha and about the ulama and about the books that are written by them and compiled by them with the rulings of fiqh and with the ahadith, I don't know if I am going to rely on that. Then either you are going to become gullible and accept ahadith that are not authentic, or you are going to become cynical and skeptical and you are going to reject ahadith that you should not reject. So you cannot say that, well, I love the Prophet, but I don't want to have anybody between me and the Prophet. I don't want to do taqleed. Or I'll just do taqleed to the Prophet and to the Imams. If you want to honor the Prophet and maintain a reverence and a deference towards him and towards the Imams, then you need to have a level of respect for the way in which their teachings have been preserved and have come down to us. Nobody will substitute for the ma'soom, but we have to preserve that means of approach to the ma'soom. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So one of the messages of Surah Al-Hujarat is deference towards our Prophet and towards his teachings, and that has a whole structure of humility before scholarship and before those who are preserving the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. Another important message that we get from Surah Al-Hujarat, which is extending from our discussion yesterday, is that this surah reminds us of what kind of a community we want to build. Now, generally in our society and in our culture, we have a tendency to self-select who we enjoy the company of and who we agree with. And so we are very quick to draw certain lines and say, well, I don't get along with this person, or we don't have similar interests, and therefore we choose who our friends and who our associates are. But there is a choice that we make based on our experience and our interests. And then there is a choice that Allah makes for us based on His wisdom. Which of the two would you put more faith and more trust in? Your choice or the choice of Allah? There was a person once who came and said to one of our Imams that I had a daughter born to me, I really wanted a son, and I'm disappointed. And the Imam changed that person's perspective with a similar kind of a question. Before your child was born, if Allah sent a message to you and said, do you want to choose the gender of the child that is going to be born based on what you want or what you think will be good for you? Or do you want to let Allah choose? Which one would you say is the better option? And the person did not hesitate. Well, if Allah is going to offer to choose for me, then of course I would say, Allah, you know best. You created me. You know whether I will live better with a son or live better with a daughter who will actually be more loving and more close to me and will benefit me more and will love me more. If Allah offered me that option, then I would say, Allah, you choose. And what did the Imam respond? Well, Allah did choose. It wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't that there was a roll of the dice and then the angels decided to give you a son or a daughter based on random selection or based on their preference. It was Allah who chose for you. Now that is true about your parents. That is true about your blood relatives. That is also true about your community. And sometimes we have people, they look at their fellow community of followers of Ahlul Bayt, and they say, maybe there is another school of thought within Islam. They are so much more organized, they have their act together, they are so much more interesting and engaging, and they have an admiration for them. Sometimes there may be a family that we think is better than our own family, and we give less importance to our relatives, our parents, our siblings, because we don't think that they are related to us in our personality or in our values. We don't think that they have a good connection to us or that we have a connection to them. But all of these relationships are given to us by Allah. And if there is something lacking, then my obligation is not to separate myself and say, I don't really like my family. I don't really like my community. I don't really like my fellow believers and my masjid and my community, but rather to say that this is what Allah has chosen for me to be part of my identity and part of my obligation. And so now I have to forge a relationship. I can't say that I don't get along with my parents, so let me find somebody else. They can be a surrogate parent or a mentor for me. I can't say that I don't get along with my siblings, and so my brothers and my sisters are my friends and not my relatives. I can't say with my religious community that there is somebody else or another group or another community that I get along with better or that I admire more, and so I will value my relationship with them over my relationship with my fellow believers. Instead, with all of the frustrations and with all of the difficulties, engage with them. And sometimes you may have to take a long view. It may take years to develop a working relationship with a relative, especially if you have a history, and sometimes you have baggage that has come from childhood or from years. So don't say that, well, we have to get rid of that baggage, we have to solve it tomorrow. But make that a lifelong project so that you will be able to, inshallah, develop a healthy relationship with them. And sometimes it isn't possible to remove that baggage entirely, but you can make sure that the hatred or the animosity between relatives is not inherited in the next generation. This is something that people who don't come from a close-knit family, they may not really fully understand. But if you have a close-knit family, then sometimes the competitiveness and even the animosity, it is inherited from one generation to another. The parents had the fight, and the children also don't know that they're related or don't get along, or they kind of have almost no relationship. Sometimes, if you work, you can restore that relationship over a period of years. At other times, it may take a generation, but that disconnect, it can be rectified and it can be undone. So the second part of Surah al-Hujarat gives us certain instructions about how to form that community. Don't turn your back and say, I don't have the time for this, I don't have the patience for this, I'm only going to live once and I'm not going to waste years of my life dealing with a community that doesn't appreciate me or doesn't value me or doesn't know what's good for it, or a family, or a relationship. If Allah has given you that relative, if Allah has given you that community, then honor it. And the ways that you can do that, we have some of those messages in Surah al-Hujarat. How can you get over yourself and become a constructive member of a collective? One of those messages we talked about yesterday, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا أن تصيبوا قوما بجهالة فتصبحوا على ما فعلتم نادمين. O you who believe, when someone comes to you with news who is fasiq, who is impious, then don't just go based on what they said, but pause and find out what is the truth. Try to get a more fair or a more objective or impartial or a more complete understanding of the facts before you respond. That way you're not just going to carry on prejudice, but you will be able to take steps to lessen the animosity or the prejudice that may exist within society. That is one of the messages. Then building upon this, there is a role to play in conflict. Conflict is normal. And this is one of those very important verses. In fact, we can say it is one of the ways in which the Quran is miraculously eloquent. That the Quran would take circumstances in the time of the Prophet and use them as just a springboard to give a message that was looking towards the future and not the present. In the time of the Prophet, there was no civil war among the Muslims. Instead, there were just small conflicts, kind of like, if you have a family reunion or you get together in Thanksgiving, you'll have, an uncle maybe get into a little bit of an argument with another uncle on another side of the family over who has the better barbecue or who was the one that actually caused a problem several years ago in a family function, or these types of small sorts of disputes, so they existed among the Ansar, between the Aus and Khazraj, and between the Muhajirin and the Ansar. Sometimes you would even have fistfights, but not any kind of war with actual weaponry or deaths or any kind of serious fighting. But Surah al-Hujarat used those small tensions that arise in any kind of small, close-knit community as an excuse, almost, as a springboard to give a message that was looking towards the future. The Muslims probably never thought that a time would come when Muslims would actually fight one another in organized armies with bloodshed and thousands or tens of thousands of troops. But that is the beauty of the Quran. Allah knew, and He used those incidents in the time of the Prophet to tell Muslims how to deal with conflict, real conflict. وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا. When you find qital between Muslims, a battle. Now, that could be like the time of the Prophet, where you and I just get into a fight and we call each other names and we go home. Now, what does everybody else do? Oh, did you see so-and-so? They was yelling at each other in the masjid. Or do you play a constructive role? وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. If you are an observer, don't pull out your camera and start recording. Don't just gossip about it with others. Don't say that's their business. Don't say that, well, this is not a pleasant environment and I don't feel safe there anymore, I'm not going to go back. فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. See what you can do to bring their hearts back together. Listen to one of them, let them rant. A lot of times these disputes, they don't come from a place of evil. They come because a person has some stress in their life, or because they feel that they have been wronged. And maybe they don't have anyone to listen to them. So if you listen to their rant, then that might make things somewhat better, and you might also be able to provide them a little bit of good advice. That, yeah, I see where you're coming from, I agree with you, let me see if I can support you. Give them some validation, and maybe even if you see something where they're missing part of the picture, you can give them good advice. Do what you can to do islah. Stand up and try to rectify. Now, what happens if the person says, absolutely not? This person that I'm fighting with is an enemy of God, and I'm going to go online and I'm going to spread all of the evil things that I know about this person. Do you know what they sell in their store? Do you know what their family is doing? Do you know what's going on in their private life? And the Quran says, فَإِن بَغَتْ إِحْدَاهُمَا عَلَى الْأُخْرَى. When one of them goes and transgresses against the other. Now it's not a good faith argument or disagreement where people don't see eye to eye, but one person is actually transgressing and doing evil. Well then, فَقَاتِلُوا الَّتِي تَبْغِي حَتَّى تَفِيءَ إِلَىٰ أَمْرِ اللَّهِ. Then go and fight or oppose the one that is transgressing until they return to the obedience or the command of Allah. So you play a constructive role. When there is a dispute, try to do islah. If one party is clearly going beyond the limits, then oppose them until they return. فَإِنْ فَاءَتْ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا بِالْعَدْلِ وَأَقْسِطُوا. And then, by your opposition, if you're able to reduce that transgression, then don't hold it against that person. There is an attribute that people sometimes have, which is highly condemned in ahadith, and that is تَتَبُّعْ عَثَرَاتِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Athra is the mistakes or the shortcomings that people have. تَتَبُّعْ الْعَثَرَات is that if you remember the mistakes that somebody made. You know, when I'm fighting with somebody, I'll say, you always do this. If I say you always do this, that means that I have a mental list of all of the times that you made that mistake. And the reason why this is highly condemned in a hadith is that the Ahlul Bayt have told us that if you remember every time somebody else made a mistake, then Allah will deal with you in the same way. Do you want Allah to remember every time you carelessly gossiped, or told a lie, or delayed a prayer, or made another mistake or committed a sin? Well, if you don't want Allah to do that, and you want Him, although He knows every detail, to ignore it, then the way that you earn that leniency and that mercy from Allah is to show that mercy and that leniency to another person. So, if it's a dispute, for example, that you always leave a mess in your wake, there is a better way to say that, which isn't to list every shortcoming another person has, and simply to say, can we be more careful about cleaning up after ourselves? Or can we be more diligent about doing this one task? So the Quran, it tells us that once a person has made a mistake, fought with another person, when that comes to an end, then forget about it. أَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا بِالْعَدْلِ وَأَقْسِطُوا. Reach a just and a fair settlement, but then do islah and let it go. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. Then the Quran emphasizes it. What kind of a relationship should you think you have with your fellow believers? إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Believers are like blood relatives. You are a fraternity. You're not co-religionists. You're not colleagues. You're not fellow citizens or fellow consumers. The label that you think of when you think of each other is, this is my full brother. This is my sibling. This is my family member. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. And in your family, you never want to see a dispute. You never want to see one party ignoring or abandoning or giving silent treatment to the others. Then the Quran, it continues, one of the ways that we want to ensure a healthy relationship, in particular, when I don't choose who that relationship is going to be with. When I'm choosing my friends, then generally people choose their friends because they have shared interests, a similar sense of humor. There's some friends who have a very wicked, sarcastic kind of humor. They're always teasing each other. And some people might not be comfortable with that. But they'll have another circle of friends where people are more supportive. Or maybe they have a different kind of a relationship. When you choose your friends, you can find a group that agrees with your personality, your sense of humor, your interests. But when you come here to the masjid, now I have a wicked sense of humor, you are very sarcastic, somebody else is straightforward, somebody else is very sensitive. We can't always choose. And so how do you manage that? If you want to honor that relationship in a family or in a community, you have to be respectful and sensitive to those differences that exist. One of the ways the Quran says is make sure you watch your tongue. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا يَسْخَرْ قَوْمٌ مِّن قَوْمٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونُوا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُمْ وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُنَّ خَيْرًا مِّنْهُنَّ. Make sure that you don't speak condescendingly, look down upon, talk down about, or speak in a mocking manner about other men or women. Now, normally, we mock people or we talk down to people whom we think that we are better than. Maybe because we have more knowledge of Islam, or maybe because we are more professionally accomplished, or maybe because of some other religious or social or personal attribute. Generally, we look down on people or we talk down about people that we think we are superior to. The Quran says that those people that you look down upon, they might be better than you. Because in the eyes of Allah, it isn't your credential or your degree or your net worth or your superficial accomplishments that are important, it is your piety. There might be an illiterate slave in the company of the Prophet, who is more honorable in the eyes of Allah than a very wealthy aristocrat of Quraysh. Because that slave, illiterate and poor, is more pious. And so the Quran, it not only instructs us not to be arrogant, but it also takes away the reason why people may sometimes be arrogant without realizing it. And that is, don't think that you are superior to others. Those that you mock, they may be better than you. وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ. Don't give rude or mocking nicknames to one another. Don't call each other with nicknames that are demeaning and that would be annoying or insulting to another person. And that changes in different cultures and different societies, but if there is something that the other person will consider to be demeaning, or when people hear it, they will think that you are mocking someone, don't use that word, even if their family calls them that. Even if you've used that nickname for years, even if you're comfortable with it, even if they're comfortable with it. But demeaning nicknames, they bring down the dignity and the level of society. And so it's not just for me to say that, this is who I am, it's my personality. It's not just for me to say, well, that person doesn't mind. But also, what kind of culture do I want to establish within society? If they don't show concern for their honor and their dignity, then I should show concern and honor for it, because we want to lift up society. The Quran says, بِئْسَ الْإِسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ. These unworthy names, they are evil, and it is unworthy of a person who is now a faithful person, a mu'min, to use those types of terms. Then the Quran, it mentions the importance of avoiding conjecture. اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم. Some forms of conjecture are a sin. And finally, the Quran says, remember that all of the good that you do, that is not a favor that you are doing to the Prophet or to Allah. Quran, it describes one group of people who are superficially Muslims. And it says, يَمُنُّونَ عَلَيْكَ أَنْ أَسْلَمُوا. O Prophet, they come to you and they make a big deal that we're Muslims. قُلْ لَا تَمُنُّوا عَلَيَّ إِسْلَامَكُمْ. Don't come to the Prophet and tell him that you are doing a favor to him or to Allah by being Muslims. بَلِ اللَّهُ يَمُنُّ عَلَيْكُمْ أَنْ هَدَاكُمْ لِلْإِيمَانِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. But all of the good that you do, if you give donations in the way of Allah, if you give your time in the way of Allah, those of you who fight and you go with your own expense, buy weapons, and then at the risk of your own life, you fight in an army to defend Islam and to defend the religion of the Prophet, that is not a favor that you are doing to the Prophet. But rather it is a favor that Allah has shown you, that He has guided your hearts to faith, and that He has given you the benefit of Iman. And this is one of the key bases of building a strong community, to feel that anything that we do for our community, anything that we do for our fellow believers, an individual or a collective, it is in reality a gift that we are receiving, not a gift that we are giving. Or another way to say that is, what we are receiving is more than what we are giving. And that means that we will always have a motivation. Sometimes people get burned out. They feel like, you know what, nobody gives me thanks. Nobody appreciates me. No one recognizes me. Nothing changes. And so they burn out from their family. They burn out from their community. But if you have this perspective, that just to be able to honor the commandment of Allah is itself a gift. And nobody needs to appreciate me or thank me or recognize me or even know what I'm doing. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees and He recognizes and He knows, and He does not la yudi'u ajra al-muhsinin. He does not forget or let go to waste the reward of those who do good. So once again, Surah al-Hujarat, as we said yesterday, it is a reminder of the character and the ethics that Muslims should have with respect to the Prophet and their religious guides, but also it is a reminder of the foundation of our community. And let us think about what kind of character we need to have in order to build a healthy community and work together, inshallah, within our families, within our community, to develop those attributes that can strengthen and that can bring together our relationships. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow all of us to adopt these noble attributes described in the Quran, in particular in Surah al-Hujarat, and may He allow us to have close-knit relationships with our parents, with our family members, with our community members, and with all mu'mineen and mu'minat, so that we can honor our obligation to the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before we conclude, a reminder, inshallah, that tomorrow we will not have a lecture, but we will have a discussion, in particular for the younger members of our community, young adults, to discuss ways that we can develop our interfaith activities and share our values, our religion with our fellow human beings who may not be Muslims or may not be familiar with Islam. And that is one of the most important tasks that we have as a community. Inshallah, we will be able to work on that if we think about it and we work together to develop the knowledge and then the resources to be able to talk about Islam and share the message of Islam with those who are not Muslim. So we look forward to seeing any of you who are available tomorrow after iftar at the same time.